What's the scariest true story you've heard or told? I've told this story before. I'm an eye doctor, and I had a patient come to me with an infected eyelid. 2 other eye doctors tried to treat and failed. They were dumping all sorts of medicine into it, and it wasn't getting any better. At this point, it was swollen and painful for weeks with no improvement despite being on tons of meds. Apparently, neither of them thought to flip the lid upside down. You know that gross trick some kids do with their upper eyelids? It was a painful maneuver for her very swollen eyelid, which might explain it. Anyhow, there appeared to be what looked like a visible abscess inside the tissue with thick gooey material. I thought I'd give it a nudge, and saw it move. This wasn't an abscess, it was something else. I managed to remove it quite easily in one whole piece. It was a fly larva. The patient told me that she had a bug hit her in the eye a few days before she got this infection. I removed the larva, and within 2 days the wound closed, and she was 100% recovered on basic antibiotic eye drops. Yes, I do have the photos from this case for those interested. TLDR. Patient had a bug lay an egg in her eyelid, and I removed the larva. I had brain surgery roughly 3 years ago. I lost my concept of time. What felt like 4 months was only 3 days. The amount of physical, mental, and emotional pain I went through was crazy. I had to find all of my memories and relearn how to walk, talk, everything. If you want to go through something terrifying, that is it. That sounds very traumatic. I hope you are doing better now. I lost my concept of time too. It's a very weird feeling. I had to relearn it. I got in a car accident, and they said I didn't have any brain trauma, but I hallucinated constantly, and one of the hallucinations was that I was strapped to a flat table slowly spinning vertically, and I was there for years. In reality it's just over a year since the accident now, but when I think about that non-stop spinning it still feels like I was spinning for 18+ years. I thought my youngest daughter, 4 years old, had graduated high school, and I used that to plead with the doctors to let me off the spinning table. It was fucking wild. Brains are so scary. This happened with my sister-in-law when she was about 11 or 12. Her and her family lived in a trailer park. Just down the street was her bus stop for school. Each morning, she would see a man in his trailer taking pictures of her and her friends. It creeped her out, so she went to tell her mom, my mother-in-law, of what this guy was doing and how he would just stand in the window staring at them and taking pictures. So, her mom calls the police and report him. The police didn't do anything. This went on for about another 2 weeks with no action from the police, to where now my sister-in-law is terrified to stand and wait for the school bus, and her mom had to call the police again. This time, the police actually arrived at this pervert's house, and lo and behold, the police find a wall covered in pictures of my sister-in-law, some of the other neighborhood little girls, and some child porn. Her and the other families watched from afar with this guy cuffed up and being escorted to the police cruiser. My HIV story. I was on a trip on my first commercial flight from Sacramento to San Diego to visit my girlfriend, and I didn't feel well. Once I got off the plane I made it to the hotel and had bouts of nausea and diarrhea for a few days straight, and finally decided to go to hospital. After waiting hours I was let into a room, and some time later an Asian woman wearing a mask and gloves entered. "Please leave the room," she told my girlfriend. "Let's call Beatrice." "No, she can stay, it's okay," I said. The doctor still hadn't looked at me, but looked back to Beatrice. "I think you should leave." I looked to Beatrice and said, "Can you please wait outside?" Right as the door closed the doctor said, "You have HIV." My mind instantly started racing, trying to problem solve. I can't have AIDS. I got tested before being with Beatrice, and I was clean, I said. The doctor again, "You have HIV," while avoiding eye contact. I looked at my palms, and for the first time in my life they were sweating, really sweating. I said again, "I can't, I've been tested." The doctor flipped a page and asked my name, which I responded, and finally the doctor's eyes made contact with my own. "I'm so sorry, I have the wrong chart. You have strep throat and laryngitis." I remember the world ending, and then the feeling the most relief I've ever experienced in my life. When I told Beatrice the whole story she awkwardly laughed and said, "But you don't have AIDS, right?" To this day, when I tell people what happened, a good portion say, "But you don't have AIDS, right?" Whole lot of fucking nope. Off the main road of a place I used to work at, a guy decided to climb under a bus to hitch a free ride. Well, the bus went over a speed bump and the guy fell and ended up getting caught on the back wheel. His body was dragged 5 blocks before the bus driver realized what was happening. A police officer who came into our store regularly told us that the guy was still alive when they got to him, but died an hour later. He said his whole back was scraped off, exposing his spine. I remember driving down that road after the fact, and you could still see a deep red blood-stained trail going on for those 5 blocks. Absolutely horrifying. Short story. My wife is from Enterprise, Oregon, and I guess a kid in her school got beheaded on his way home. Was literally found with his head cut off on the side of the street, and to this day no one knows who did it or how it happened. Absolutely gives me chills. Yikes. I mean, WTF. It's like that guy on the Greyhound bus that beheaded another guy. I was using Greyhounds to travel home after uni semesters. Like I'd get a shooting or stabbing, but to work at someone's neck with a blade till it comes off is so sick. What's going through their mind when doing it? When I was much younger, we lived across the street from a big family. He had a wife and 5 sons, and one night he brought his whole family into the living room and lined them up and pulled a shotgun out from under the couch and shot himself in the head. The kids were messed up again for the rest of their lives. My great-grandpa once lined up all his children, including my grandpa and his wife, and told them he was going to shoot all of them. I don't know what happened, but he didn't end up shooting them. He was an alcoholic, and he died before I ever met him. My grandpa has always been a gruff man with a short fuse, but you can't really blame him after hearing about his childhood. Edit. For those of you who are confused, my grandpa and great-grandpa are different people. The story of John Edward Jones getting stuck in Nutty Putty Cave in Utah. He became wedged in the tide crawl when he took a wrong turn in the cave system. Rescuers could do nothing to get him out, and he was stuck in there for 28 hours before he died from cardiac arrest because feet were above his head and his heart was pumping overtime. One of the rescuers even gave him a phone to call his wife and talk to his young daughter before he died. One of our employees fell into the hammer box. This is a device filled with ultra-high torque rotating hammers used to grind up large appliances into scrap metal. It apparently turned 3 times before the emergency shoot-off was hit, pulling in half the employee's body at a diagonal running from the middle of his pelvis to his shoulder. The gruesome part was that he was still alive, as the pressure from the hammers was holding the enormous wound shut. Took 30 minutes for EMTs to arrive, while he screamed for them to simply turn the machine back on and end it. He didn't make it. A kid from a couple towns away from me lived on a farm with his girlfriend. They were in the kitchen one night. She was cooking and him and his friend were cleaning their guns at the table. His went off and shot her, killing her immediately. He then loaded up, ran outside and shot himself in the head. Why would you clean a loaded gun that's pointed on another person? One day as a kid I was exploring the forests near our house with my cousin. The forest was on a hill, but there were several craters there because of bombs that were dropped there during the World Wars. Germany. One day we saw a backpack at the bottom of one. We tried to climb down, but it was kinda steep and slippery, so we didn't want to risk falling. We planned on returning later with a rope and went home. The next day news story was that there was a backpack found with the remains of a girl in that forest. A guy walking his dog found it after the dog wouldn't stop barking and going crazy at the edge of the crater while staring at the backpack. We stopped exploring the forests after. Edit. English is hard sometimes. Walking my dog and crossing the street with a green light and a guy blows through the red light and almost hits me and the dog. I yell "asshole" and he slams on his brakes and turns around and pulls into parking lot ahead of me. I get closer and see the car has Illinois plates. I live in PA. He says "careful who call asshole, I've killed people." I just keep walking and he drives away. The next day I hear spree killer Andrew Cunanan used a stolen credit card at a gas station in my town. 100% was him. I called her asshole. One of my dad's friend's wife was murdered by some crazy dude walking down the street. This guy had just been released from a mental hospital and literally just stabbed her as she walked home. When my dad's friend came back he thought she had just taken the dogs out for a walk, So he walked along the normal walk route and he saw loads of blue lights. He was stopped by a police officer and wasn't allowed any closer until he saw that it was his wife. My mother never taught me to swim because when she was a teenager she saw a friend get sucked into a whirlpool at the bottom of a drainage lake. That is the deepest body of water within a few hundred miles of us. They didn't find his body for days. My dad watched his brother drown as a child and was unable to do anything about it because he was so young and didn't know how to swim. Completing 8 levels of swimming lessons was mandatory for me as a child. When I was young, I saw a documentary about a guy who got flesh-eating bacteria in his nasal cavity. It ate his face, and he's still alive. Eventually they removed the bacteria by removing the eaten parts of his face. He got a prosthetic face, which back in those days was basically a plastic Halloween mask that tried to look human. At the end of the documentary, he took the mask off. His face from his forehead down to his mouth was just a hole. Edit, it was a fungus, not bacteria, apparently. I think the story of Tina Fey getting the scare on her face is super fucked up. She was a kid just sitting and playing in her front yard when a random guy pulled up, got out of his car, and slashed her face for no reason with a razor. WTF. A similar story I know of, there's an old video somewhere out there of a family, mom, dad, toddler in a stroller, walking along the street, and as this random lady passes them, out of nowhere she just lunges at the toddler and starts strangling him. It takes the parents a second to react cause it was just so sudden and unexpected, but they beat her off and shout at her, and then she walks away like nothing happened. Fucking crazy. When I was a kid we lived on a large acreage. One night we came home late, and as we entered the driveway we noticed a car pulled over down the road against the ditch that bordered our property. We saw 2 people, one of them climbing out of the ditch. When we parked my mom told my dad to go see if they were okay or needed help. My dad said that they looked to be okay, and it was probably not a good idea, so we all went in and to bed. The next morning we were woken up by the police. They had our whole yard taped off because some horseback riders had noticed a leg sticking out of a black plastic bag in the ditch exactly where that car was parked. That look on my mom's face I'll never forget. We know for sure my dad wouldn't have made it back home alive if he had listened to my mom that night. I was in the drunk tank with a guy who beat another man to death. The guy didn't die immediately, was in intensive care for 3 days then died in the hospital. The man who killed him told me specific details about it, and on the 3rd day, when the guy in Ike died, the cops came in the cell and put him in isolation across the hall. They left him in general pop until the guy actually died, and once he was officially charged with capital murder then they took him out of our cell. I was 17 at the time. Never forget being scared to fall asleep right next to this dude. When I worked in healthcare I had a patient who got a sinus infection. He stopped taking his antibiotics after a few days because he felt better. His sinus infection came back with a vengeance. When he got to the emergency department he was presenting with stroke symptoms. The infection had spread to his cranial cavity. There was so much pus that it was twisting his brain. No one thought he would survive the surgery. The family was advised to expect the worst. Amazingly he actually survived. He ended up needing 3 more surgeries to wash out and spent almost 2 months in the hospital. Take your full dose of antibiotics, people. There was a man who got out of his car after it broke down on the highway and attempted to walk across the highway to the other side late at night. He was hit by a car and his body was driven over so many times that by the time the sun came up his body parts were scattered across 300 meters of highway. When I was about 5, woke up to my house, surrounded by loud voices and bright white lights. A group of robbers broke into our house after some kind of heist and were using us as hostages with rifles. The police had our house surrounded. My parents, grandparents, and I didn't really speak English back then, so my 12-year-old sister had to translate the demands to the police and instructions to us. My grandma told me to go back to sleep, which I somehow easily did. Edit, the end of the story. After falling asleep and waking up the next day, everything was fine. The only thing everyone kept talking about were where the robbers were standing. They decided not to have too many entrances from the house, so they barricaded themselves in our kitchen. Apparently the entire kitchen floor was covered in guns. I kept asking what happened, but my family was firmly in the mindset of don't tell the kids anything, ever. Since little kid me was kind of dumb and nothing really happened to me directly, I forgot about the situation for years. I asked again, but they still don't want to talk about it. It's still kind of scary to think that, had they wanted to, I could have died in my sleep that night. Well, there's that story about a woman who was found pushing her baby had been dead on a swing for 2 days. The baby died from hypothermia and dehydration. She was found not criminally negligent due to schizophrenia. I met a guy who had been traveling Australia with a couple friends, hitchhiking around as many of us had done. One of his friends told him they were near his distant uncle's house, whom he'd never met before. He got a phone number from a family member, and as they had hoped, the uncle offered them a place to stay. He picked them up in town and drove them out to his rural property way out in the bush. They said he seemed like a pretty normal guy, friendly and cheery. When it was time to set up a place to sleep, the uncle took them to a closet that was totally full of sleeping bags and bedrolls. They didn't think much of it at the time and all grabbed a kid and set up on the living room floor. They stayed a couple days and nothing out of the ordinary happened, and afterwards the uncle drove them to the bus station and they continued on their way. About a year later, that man was arrested and charged with several counts of murder. He was the man who was picking up young hitchhiking backpackers and slaughtering them. The guy who told me this story was 100% certain he had slept in the sleeping bag of one of his victims. I had an associate that was a fireman. He had to go find the head of his brother-in-law after a car accident. Then he had to console his sister when she heard. Tough bloke. Can you imagine that being your day? Not nearly as horrific, but a 911 dispatcher relayed all the information about her own daughter's fatal accident. The first officer on scene recognized the daughter, but since it was pre-cell phone days, did not have a way to quickly notify anyone to get her off radio, so she wasn't hearing all the details. I can't imagine how awful it was for her once she found out. When I was about 8 years old, our school was doing swimming lessons as part of the curriculum. My mum worked late, so we went to after school care and didn't get home until after dark. When we got home, mum asked me to take my wet togs, bathing suit, and towel out to the clothes line to dry so I could use them the next day. I was so confident going outside to do this and had this real feeling of being a big kid. I walked into our backyard only for a man to be running at me. I screamed, jumped inside and instinctively locked the back door as I did so. As this was happening, my mum told me she heard the guy jump the gate which was next to her bedroom just after she heard me scream and came running to find me. I slept with the light on until I was 16, and I get my husband to go outside for me while it's dark. This thread is probably dead now, but when I was about 4 and my brother 11, we stayed at my aunt's between moving house. Her neighbor had a son my brother's age, so my bro used to go play with him on weekends, etc. One day my brother goes over after lunch. The dad opens the door, says the kids and mum are out shopping, but come on in and have some juice and tell him about how the move is going. My bro goes in, has a drink and a chat, then comes back to my aunt's after no more than an hour. A few days later, police are all over the place. Turns out the dad murdered his wife and kids and was in the middle of burying them in the back garden around the time my brother knocked. Crazy to think what could be different if my brother had visited a couple of hours before or caught that guy on an off day. Lived W3 other girls sophomore year of college. All 3 took off early for spring break, leaving me alone in the house. First night alone, I heard someone bang on my front door at 2 AM. Then I hear more knocks at the back door. A man yells, "Boulder police, open the door." When I didn't, I heard body slams against both doors. Soon I hear, "Little girl, open the door, we know you're alone." At this point I'm so scared I keep accidentally dialing 611 instead of 911. When I eventually do get the police, cars roll up. Thankfully, just minutes later, officers have 4 boys from our school hockey team face down on the grass. I had to file restraining orders against them, and the kicker, one lived across the street from me and we'd never spoken a single word before then. I'm not sure I remember all the details correctly, but anyway, a guy was cleaning a giant cooking tank at a tuna factory. It was so big that he had to climb all the way in. Someone else didn't check, and protocol was broken along the way somewhere. Second guy locked the barrel and turned it on, cooking the guy inside alive. The Rian American story. A young lady had an affair with her boss in the 1960s, got pregnant. After threatening to tell her boss wife, she was killed by her boss, who then put her body in an industrial barrel. He hid the barrel in his house for years and none of the various owners opened it due to the weight. Finally one guy decided to dispose of it in the 90s, and when he opened it, he saw it contained something. An investigation traced the barrel and girl back to the man, who then killed himself before police could come arrest him, after confirming he was the father of the unborn baby via DNA. The lady's mother was in her late 80s when she was told her missing daughter was finally found. She claims that she had been having dreams about her daughter being inside a metal container for years after she had gone missing. My friends and I were drinking one night and going around asking, hey, whatever happened to, in this case, a guy a few of us used to have an aid period with in high school. Nice kid. Googled him. I found a few sad results playing this game in the past, and there were a couple appellate court decisions visible in first few results. Turns out he went to Afghanistan, got extremely fucked up in combat. Court notes said he saw things there that completely undid him, basically, and came home with PTSD and delusional schizophrenia. Once home, he apparently has been on a mission to kill his mother, to save her from demons, and send her to heaven. He's tried and failed numerous times, apparently. It's not just that A-B plot though, it's all this around. We looked up his social media accounts then, and it's just threads and threads of manic rambling about demons. It was sad to find this, and not the only time I found a former classmate lost his/her mind, unfortunately. But also terrifying to think you could be normal, then through one set of circumstances or another, become completely insane within a few years. I was in class in 10th grade and the teacher was asking everyone how their weekend was. The quietest girl in the class spoke, and while breaking down in tears, said she was on a trip in the mountains with her mom. They made a stop for some reason and she looked over the cliff and saw an overturned vehicle with a dead family scattered about. Last year, there was a girl named Ruth who went to University of Illinois Chicago. She was heading out from an event and was catcalled by a man who followed her into a parking garage. He killed and raped her, then just left her there. She went to a high school near me, and it breaks my heart to recall the story. I wouldn't say it's the scariest one I know, but it was pretty close to home. I got a call from my dad asking if I was okay about half an hour after it happened. Recently a guy at my university was doing construction on a new building. Basically there were 3 dudes standing on a big glass roof thing that was supposed to be stable. Long story short, it wasn't. They fell right through the thing. 2 guys got out okay, but it was a 20-something temp worker who ended up getting killed because of it. I mean, that's combining falling to your death with getting lacerated to death. Awful way to go.